Alrighty guys, here's the next part of our AP World Modern 2020 review. Again, we've got to cover, from 1200 to 1900 to answer one question. So just, hang along here. We've just done the High Middle Ages, and now we're going to go over to Eastern Asia into China, where the first target area of this review is going to be the Great Song Dynasty. There's been the Sui, the Tang, and the Song dynasties. And in China, we have this period of where the Sui dynasty begins the Grand Canal. And in the Tang dynasty was the enlarging of the Chinese Empire and great technological development. Well, now we're going to get to the third of these great dynasties, the Song dynasty, that's going to start in 960 and end around 1300, around the time of the Renaissance, coinciding with like the Crusades and the High Middle Ages of Europe for your contextualization paragraph. Now, the Song dynasty is going to be a little different from their predecessor. They did not want an empire as big as the Tang because it was too difficult to manage, so they are going to shrink it. It's going to be slightly smaller, but more efficient and more manageable. And at this time, the Chinese switched from their main crop of being wheat. Wheat you can make bread with, but it's highly susceptible to insects and famine and drought and too much water. So coming out of Vietnam, the Song dynasty switches to a brand new crop known as champa rice. Champa rice will replace wheat in China, and it is a crop that will grow to get 2 growing seasons in one. This is going to allow a major population explosion to happen in China. The problem is the Song are going to have to face the return threat from the Mongols, who are beaten down, and now they're going to come back. And so, in the Song dynasty, switching to champa rice and irrigation is going to allow 2 crops a year to be grown instead of one. One to eat and one to pay taxes with and store for a rainy day. So there's a massive population explosion. And now that the rice paddies and the wheat fields are gone, replaced by the rice paddies, there's more time for leisure. And with leisure time comes the idea of thinking, all right, how to make our lives easier. So here's where we're going to get a lot of Chinese artistic and cultural advancements, and also different movable looms and water wheels, technology-saving devices as well. And it's at this time that merchants are going to have a very bizarre role here. In China, we normally do not like merchants because they are seen to make money off of other people's labor. But traveling the overland Silk Road routes, Silk Roads, remember the Silk Road was not just one road, it was many roads, hundreds of miles wide, coming in from like Russia, from the Middle East, Constantinople and Rome, coming up out of India, traveling across China. Foreign countries' merchants are welcome. They bring ideas, they bring news, they bring unique products like, glassware from Venice and iron from Italy. And so they travel not only overland, but also via the Indian Ocean. And here is where, in the Song dynasty, we get a lot of cultural diffusion taking place. So as a result, along the east coast of China, think of like, Portland, Maine, going down to like Boston, Massachusetts, to Hartford, Connecticut, Wilmington, Delaware, New York City, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Norfolk, Virginia, Wilmington, South Carolina, North Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, all the way down to St. Augustine. The big cities of the American East Coast are over here in China, as several of these cities reach a population of over 1 million. Now, while we're growing, the social structure in China is going to stay the same. So foreign merchants are valued. Chinese merchants, we still don't like you. But in China, a peasant could increase their social status if they were smart enough and had time by taking the old Confucian civil service exam. If you passed it, you could leave the farm and be a governor or a manager or a mayor of a small city. And you could move up, right? Remember what we talked about later on in China. You pass that test, if you're good enough, there's no telling how far you could go. Unfortunately, most peasants couldn't do this because they spent their time working, and it was the rich kids who had the opportunity to do this. Now, while Chinese merchants were necessary, and we understand we like them, we still recognize they're on the bottom of society. You're necessary, but you make money off of other people's labor. You could go crazy, stupid rich. It really doesn't matter because you are seen as low on the scale. And here in the Song Dynasty, women's status began to decline. China is always a patriarchal society, but even in the aristocratic households, women are going to decline with the practice of foot binding, where a young girl is taken and her toes are going to be wrapped up in like an ace bandage until they break and they begin to grow, kind of like making a fist. They said that this would make the foot look like a beautiful flower, but curl your toes and walk, it's just painful. And they were shoved into like these tiny little elf shoes. As you can see, the toes have like curled over and are growing into the heel of the foot. Just a painful process. But in the Song Dynasty, they are able to come up with a few interesting things. Number one is a water clock, kind of like an old wind-up cuckoo clock, but powered by water. You got like a gallon of water and you dumped it and it ran down this channel that turned a cog in a wheel, and it would keep time for 24 hours. Then you had to refill that bucket of water. Pretty soon they attached them to like a stream or to a fountain, so you didn't have to worry about refilling that bucket all the time. They invented a seismograph, kind of like a weeble wobble device with different frogs or dragons with a marble in its mouth. And the bigger the marble, the bigger the shock wave. Now, it didn't give them a lot of warning time, but it gave them enough. The motorized spinning wheel, like from Sleeping Beauty that I showed you, and landscape painting, as the Chinese always have this deep sensitivity to nature. And here's where China will take its characters and carve them into wooden blocks like dominoes, and they could place them down and rub ink over them, and they developed the world's first movable type in a hand roll printing. Now you didn't have to copy everything by hand. It was like the original Xerox machine. Documents that were written were medical techniques, medical herbs, and different farming ideas are put into books and distributed throughout the Song Dynasty. Now, unfortunately, the Song are going to be defeated by Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, and this will bring an end to one of the many golden ages of China. Here is the early invention of the water clock with all of the, you got to dump in the water, up here. It goes through the channel and moves the gears. These are the bigger ones with this big water wheel that they attach to flowing water. You can see there's a little guy down here. So this thing was like a two-story building, but it kept accurate time. Here's a photograph of the seismograph with the dragon who would drop the marble into the mouth of a frog. Like a tiny marble here and a big giant fat marble over here. Here is acupuncture in my picture of their wooden block printing, which was sophisticated. But now you have the great empire of Genghis Khan. After Genghis has died, he is going to conquer this way, and then he's going to split his armies into forts, his grandson. One going all the way up into Russia, forming the Golden Horde, one going over to Eastern Europe, here at Constantinople, and the one that's going to start the Black Plague, and another one going down into the Middle East, like Hulagu and Bert, guys we're going to talk about in the spread of Islam. Well, Genghis gets all of this started, but he is going to die. And his empire, as I said, will be divided into these four spheres, as four kingdoms known as Khanates, right there, one for each of his grandsons. Now, these Khanates are going to be, related family members, but in four separate areas. And one of them, the Khanate of the Great Khan, is going to be given to Genghis Khan's grandson Kublai, who will come to power in 1260. And he will set up a new dynasty in China known as the Yuan dynasty. It is a dynasty in China of the 31 that is not run by Chinese but run by the Mongols. Kublai in 1279 is going to reinvade China, and he will take over the emperorship. He is the first non-Chinese ruler, kicking off the Yuan dynasty. Now, Kublai Khan did not like the Chinese. He wanted to keep his Mongols, while they governed China, he wanted to keep them separate from the Chinese, not to be assimilated and absorbed into their culture. So they have different customs, different cultures, and different laws. The highest, most powerful positions will be held by Mongols or foreigners. Chinese officials were pushed to the bottom on the local level. But the Chinese were sophisticated, right? They've got the water clock and the seismograph. And the Mongols, man, I'm out living in a yurt, which is kind of cool. The few I've stayed in, or sleeping out underneath my horse, or even on my horse. And these Chinese, man, they got all this technology. It's not long before some of the Mongols will begin to become absorbed. Kublai Khan will have the Grand Canal dug by the Sui dynasty. He will have it cleaned out and reintegrated and enlarged. The 135-mile canal. It is the longest canal dug by pure human labor. And he will also build a roadway system, an 1,100-mile highway system. Think of the Great Royal Road of Persia, or the Roman and Incan roads. Right, this is to spread trade, communication, and troop movements. And it also helps not only internal Chinese trade, but external Chinese trade as well, with rest stops, with water wells dug, with fruit trees planted, all to encourage trade. Same thing going on in China when it's getting started over in the Incan area as well, for your context. And at this time, it's an area known as Pax Mongolica, all the way across the Silk Road. You were able to freely travel safely from Europe to Asia. And it was said a fair maiden could put a pot of gold on her head and walk untouched across this land. And merchants had a sign from the Khan. And if there was crime, you better get out of town, because the Khan had it locked down. If you were caught hurting a merchant by the Khan's army, they had two ways of dealing with you. They would wrap you up in a carpet and put you on a low rise in the middle of a field and cover you with dirt. Then they would stampede horses on you. Horses might not step on a human body or an obstacle, but they would have you low enough and you would be stampeded to death. Or they would tie leather ropes to your arms and your legs and hit 4 horses and have you dismembered. So there's a lot of trade going on. And coming out of China is silk, is porcelain, their ideas of gunpowder, movable block printing, the ideas of using paper currency, different games, and coming, horses are going to travel. And then we're going to get the Arabic and Indian numeral system, iron and glassworks coming from Europe. Everything is being traded. And it's at this time that one of the great stories that Marco Polo traveled from Venice to Kublai Khan's court in 1275. That did not happen. He probably got, midways and talked to some guys who made it over, but he didn't go all the way because there are some inaccuracies. So from Europe, you've got wine and wool, metalwork. From North Africa, glass and salt. From the Middle East, Persian carpets and like dates. Coming from India, jasmine, sandalwood, saffron, lapis lazuli. Here from, we have, almonds, silk, textiles, gold, silver, everything coming back and forth across this crazy major economic powerhouse going from east and west that was completely and totally safe. Now, Marco Polo is said to have stayed there for nearly 20 years as he traveled around China. When he gets back, he is captured and he's thrown in prison where he writes books and tells stories about China to help him get him released. But there are some inaccuracies. So, but he does write about paper money and these black stones that could, burn. It was most likely coal. So he has some ideas in there, and this is supposed to be the travels of Marco Polo and his dad and his uncle of Marco coming all the way down and back. Now, we don't know that he did make it, but we do know in 1345, roughly 70 years later, a Moroccan merchant named Ibn Battuta, an Arabic scholar, will travel from Africa and he visits China. And he not only includes accurate descriptions, but also drawings of things like the Grand Canal and the Great Wall. And Battuta writes down his travels. He is a guy that traveled 73,000 miles and went to 44 modern countries. He's the guy who coins the phrase Dar al-Islam, the abode of Islam. We don't think Marco Polo made it in that stupid pool game, but we know Ibn Battuta did. And so, the end of the Yuan dynasty is going to end Mongol rule. Kublai Khan, just like any good Khan, tries to expand his empire. He tries to go into the jungles of Southeast Asia, modern-day Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And he tries to capture Japan. He will send 2 invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281. Both of them will be sunk by hurricanes with the Japanese emperor, like the airbender, going down there, clapping their ships. He loses a lot of men, a lot of equipment, and a lot of money. And so in addition to these wars, Kublai Khan will spend a lot of money, like all our absolute monarchs, on public works projects and luxuries, and he is going to go broke. He will die in 1294. And after that, different family members will fight a civil war, and the breakup of the Khanate Empire is on its way. This is one of my favorite paintings of the Mongol warships being trashed in the sea. The Japanese soldiers like, woo, 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 because if the Mongols made it, Japan was done. So by the 1300s, the Mongols infighting, there is a rebellion in China, along with a period of famine, flood, and disease, the Black Plague. So in 1368, the Mongols are gone, and one of the great high points in Chinese history, the Great Ming Dynasty, is going to show up. So we have a Middle Eastern, Khanate in the 1300s. We've got one in Central Asia. We've got the Golden Horde up in here. So you've got Kublai's here. You got 1, you've got 2, you've got 3, and you've got 4. And they will all disappear with the Golden Horde fading out last in Mother Russia in the 1480s. Now I'm going to fast forward this a little bit, and we are going to talk about Japan very, very, very briefly. We are going to talk about going into, well, let's just go back here to the Heian period. And remember, periods of Japanese history were named for the capital city. And before all of this, working with the Korean dynasties, Korea is going to be a cultural bridge where Japan will send their young men out to study in China to form their own separate and unique culture. And at this point, Heian Japan, right before our time period, is modern day Kyoto. And the king, the emperor of Japan, will be seen as a living god, and Japan is ruled by the only single line dynasty in world history. It's over 2,000 years old. There's still a Yamato on the throne today. But for a lot of this period of history, the emperor is up doing whatever the emperor does in the palace, and the rule is done by a shogun. So at this time, Japan has borrowed everything it can from China, and now they're going to refine them and make them a better fit for Japan. Taxes now can only be collected in money or in physical products, things you make or foodstuffs. And this is going to usher in the period of Japanese feudalism that is a mirror image of the Western European feudalism. Instead of king, upper lord, noble, and knight, we have emperor, shogun, daimyo, and samurai. Samurais and knights and daimyos and lords are the same thing. The emperor is the symbolic head of the country, but he doesn't have a whole lot of power. That's going to be in the hands of the chief executive, the chief military officer, the shogun, the actual ruler. The shogun is going to bestow plots of land to daimyos, who are large landowners loyal to the shogun. These daimyos are going to have a stable or a clubhouse full of samurai, these soldiers, and samurai simply means one who serves, that are loyal to their lord and their daimyo, but they're soldiers for the shogun. And the peasants do the work of everyone else, while the emperor is up there drinking sake and doing whatever he is doing. Now, by the late Heian period, many daimyo, proximity to authority, are acting independently, and they're fighting each other, causing many small wars, just like the nobles in Europe are doing. And there was one family, known as the Fujiwaras, who tried to take advantage of this. They knew they could never be the emperor, so they were having their daughters and granddaughters marry Yamato men. And this way they could influence the emperor. Well, that practice will end in 1158 when a young emperor named Shirakawa comes in and says, wait a minute, I'm the emperor, this is what we're going to do and how we are going to do it. And it's at this time that a Japanese empress will order the Japanese kana or kana to be created, the Japanese written language. Before, they were trying to write in Chinese characters, and some things just didn't fit. And so, I kind of fast forward through the two lady writers. Here are the Mongols getting destroyed again, and it's at this time where we get a change. There is going to be a civil war in Japan, and the guy that's going to win it is going to be a guy by the name of Minamoto Yoritomo, the guy that I had you guys all cheer, where there will be no trace of Chinese government in Japan. It's going to be a military government. And Minamoto Yoritomo is going to simplify and streamline things, like an absolute monarch. He has, the shogun. And then he's going to have three offices. The office of the samurai, to decide who gets to be a samurai and police them. There's going to be an office of administration, someone to write down his laws. Then a legal and a justice wing. These three guys met with the shogun every day, and he told them what he wanted done. It's at this period in Japan where Japanese history will be cyclical. When they grow and expand, they'll have a problem, and they go back to a variation of these same 3 offices set up by Minamoto Yoritomo. And so now we're now deep into our time period, and we got the Ashikaga era. And this is again where we have an emperor like Shirakawa wanted to be in power, and he leads a rebellion against his own shogun. And the shogun is like, Emperor, I got things, you cannot rebel against me. So the shogun sends his best warrior Ashikaga to go put the emperor in his place. Well, Ashikaga joins with the emperor, defeats the shogun, and says, Your Highness, make me the new shogun. Ashikaga will use Yoritomo's ideas to fix Japan. Japan will get some good ideas, they will grow, they will plateau, and then they'll kind of devolve. Then they will go back to Yoritomo's 3 ideas, but it's the same pattern that happens over and over and over again. But Ashikaga changes the economy. He says skilled artisans should no longer only have to produce products for their daimyo. Make the quota for your daimyo, give the emperor his share, and then take your excess, move around Japan and sell it. Many powerful daimyos like the Hondas and the Toyotas, who have highly skilled artisans, will go out and recruit and pay for more, giving them access to better artisans to make more money. And this begins to build a national economy inside of Japan. So this is that 1300 period, like the High Middle Ages in Europe is kind of the same in Japan. The Song Dynasty is growing. Japan will stay this way until the late 1500s, where they are going to enter their dark ages. Well, they will cut themselves off until Commodore Perry shows up in the 1800s. The Japanese and Tokugawa Ieyasu will believe that they have perfected civilization. Here's a little bit of Zen Buddhism that I told you guys about in class. And that is the end of your reviews for the day. Enjoy it, guys. I'll be back with more soon.